Hi everyone, welcome to the September 11th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragon, and I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, Craig Mulkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to do some handicapping at a couple of venues we don't often travel to, Kentucky Downs and Woodbine. At Kentucky Downs, we're going to talk about their entire late pick 5 sequence on Saturday, a number of graded stakes races in that sequence. Actually, the entire sequence is stakes races, featuring that Run Happy Turf Sprint, featuring some of the top turf sprinters in the country, as well as the Kentucky Turf Cup, which has attracted Zulu Alpha, arguably the leader of that older marathon turf division. So we'll get to those races, but it's a pretty difficult sequence, and we're going to talk about some of our ideas throughout that. And then we'll go up to Canada and talk about the Queen's Plate, which is also taking place on Saturday. Those Ontario-bred 3-year-olds going the 10 furlongs. That's drawn a pretty interesting field. Some colts, a filly that might actually go favored in that race. So we'll talk about all the contenders about the Queen's Plate at the end of the show. But Craig, first we're going to handle this Kentucky Downs card. And the Kentucky Downs meet's always pretty fun. You've got that unusual European style track, and you typically get some pretty competitive fields there. That's definitely the case in this sequence.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And a few things I just want to mention about the card in general. First, I did look. There is a good chance for rain. I know it's raining here in Oklahoma City today, and it has been for a few days. So possible it's headed that way. So just keep that in mind for your handicapping. There is the pick 5 is a 14% takeout pick 5. So that's one of the better ones around. So certainly some good value. And then just one other thing on a handicapping note as we talk about these races, the way they've been running the races at Kentucky Downs, the run-ups have just been hugely long, up to a half furlong, maybe even a little bit more. I time a lot of races from video, and the run-ups actually taken more than 8 seconds in a lot of cases. So when you see, for example, a 6.5 furlong race, know that that race is more like 7 furlongs. And when you throw in the weird nature of the course, it's probably even a longer than that, considering the hills and things like that.
Yeah, and just watching the races this week, we've seen some unusually fast opening quarter miles, and then they slow it down a little bit for the second quarter, and that's typically what you see when you've got a long run-up. So when you're just watching the races, kind of keep that in mind, if the first quarters might not be as fast as they seem.
Right, and also keep in mind that's a track that is using the new GPS system, and we've seen what Equibase has to say about that. So for now, I take those times with at least a small grain of salt.
All right, let's dive into the sequence. And as you said, there is some rain in the forecast. Hopefully it holds off. I was just looking at the forecast. It seems like it's going to hit sometime in the afternoon on Saturday, so hopefully they get lucky. The pick 5 sequence, though, starts in the 7th race. It's the ladies' turf grade 3 event going a mile. And Chad Brown's actually entered a couple in this race. He doesn't start that many horses at Kentucky Downs typically, but he's got the likely favorite in here in the number 6, Regal Glory. And he's just placed this filly pretty ambitiously in her 2 starts so far as a 4-year-old, because he's pitted her against his Stable Star newspaper of record, who was just unstoppable in New York earlier this year. Regal Glory is just not as good as a horse like newspaper of record, or even those like Beau Recall and Uni, who she faced last time in that Just a Game. This is the dropping class that Regal Glory probably needs, and personally, I think a mile is her best distance.
Yeah, she's certainly going to be tough in here. It's a race where the pace projector doesn't see a whole lot of pace. As usual, Mitchell Road, whenever she's entered, is projected in the front early. But even given that scenario, she just doesn't seem to be in top form lately that we saw last year at some points, and I think she's a bit over her head. So I do think she'll probably get an easy lead. It's not going to matter. Even if you want to excuse her soft turf race last time, it's like I said, I just don't think she's at her best. Regal Glory is clearly the horse to beat figure-wise. I don't really have any knocks on her. I don't think she's just like standout kind of single, though. I think it could be a bit more interesting than that. And a couple others I'm going to look at and use in the pick 5. Secret Message, I think, is a bit interesting. She comes in off of 2 races where the pace was really unfriendly to her style, so I think her form's muddied up a little bit. I believe she is the second choice on the morning line, so no great shakes there. And if I'm looking for a price, I'm going to look at Princess Causeway. She's a filly who's won here the last 2 years at Kentucky Downs. And just on that alone, she would be worth the big price that she's going to be. But I also think there's some reasons to discount her race last time. I think it was probably clearly a prep for this race, and I'm definitely going to use her as my price horse.
That's interesting. She's a horse that I've liked going shorter in the past in dirt sprints. But you're right, she does have those Kentucky Downs races in the past that are victories. She's going to have to improve to be competitive against this field, but she's going to be a big price. I saw this race pretty much the same way with regard to the two favorites. Regal Glory, I mean, she's likely to probably go down off that 9-5 morning line because she just, as you said, has a big speed figure out on this field, has those class lines, just makes a ton of sense. And if Secret Message is a much bigger price as the likely second choice, I would lean maybe a little bit towards her as the value play because Secret Message has actually been in pretty good form this year. She's just been in some spots where the pace hasn't really worked out for her, as you mentioned. She ran well in that Mint Julep 3 back when she got the victory, but I thought she ran just as well 2 and 3 back, both in the Jenny Wiley when she was only beaten 3 lengths by Rushing Fall, and then last time in that Perfect Sting when her trip just did not work out. In that race, the pace was slow. The horse that won, Feel Glorious, was covered up inside for much of the way and got out at the very last moment. And Secret Message sort of had to go around everybody at the quarter pole and actually was finishing up pretty well to get third. Secret Message just seems to me like one of these horses that will like Kentucky Downs because it's got that long stretch run, seems to really favor horses that can stay on, that have some stamina in the late stages. Just seems like the kind of horse that's going to really appreciate this course here. So I would mostly lean on Secret Message along with the favorite Regal Glory.
Yeah, no problem with her at all. I do worry a little that once again she's not going to get any pace, but I have the same feeling as you. It may not matter when the speed horses aren't that good, and the feeling I have the same as you is that she looks like a horse who's going to like this kind of course.
Moving on to the second leg, which is the ladies turf sprint, going 6.5 furlongs. And the favorite here, or the two horses likely to vie for favoritism, are Got Stormy, who's actually turning back to the shortest distance that she's ever tried in her career after finishing second against the boys in the 4-star Dave last time, and Kamari towards the outside for Wesley Ward, who just seems to be able to run over any kind of surface. She's a really cool horse coming back from Royal Ascot, where she was second in the Group 1 Commonwealth Cup, also against the males. So 2 horses who were second in Group 1s against the males last time, now running against fillies. They're the 2 horses to beat. Did you try to look deeper than them, or are they just the right 2 horses in this race?
I may use one other horse that I'll get to in a minute, but I mean, they're clearly the best 2. I'm not one to beat up on morning lines, but 4-1 on Kamari. Come on, there's no way in the world she's going to be 4-1. If that was offered, I'd get every cent I could and bet it on her. And not that I think she's a cinch, but it would be just crazy value. But like I said, that's not going to happen. I would imagine you'd agree, but we'll hear in a sec. Got Stormy comes in. She looked like she got back to her best form, but there are definitely some question marks. As you said, it's the shortest race of her life, though not quite as short as the distance would lead you to believe, as I mentioned early. But I do think that's a question mark with her. And I also think maybe some of that best getting back to form last time was, maybe looks better than it was because she was clearly on what I think was the best part of the track that day. Just got a great trip in there. So, while she did run well, I'm not sure she's as good as that race is going to make her look. So of the 2, I would probably prefer Kamari. I do think they're the 2, but one other horse I'm going to use who would be a much better price is Kariba. She should love this distance, I think. She won last time at 6. She's been successful going longer before, and it just seems like this is a good fit for her. She could get a really nice pace set up in here, and she has Irad Ortiz, who just rides these kind of races really well.
Yeah, we're actually on exactly the same page in this race. With everything you said, I kind of think Kamari might go favorite in this race. She's just so good. She runs well every time. I don't think it's going to be lost on the wagering public how well she's running her turf sprints overseas, which really are her 2 best performances. And now she's on what is usually termed a European-style turf course in this country. She just seems like she's going to be really tough in this race. Got Stormy. I agree with you about her trip last time in the 4-star Dave. It did work out very well for her. Horses that rode the rail seemed to have an advantage. I imagine she fooled Tyler Gaffalione a little bit because he handled her at the top of the stretch like he thought he had the race in the bag. He rode her up to Halliday and just pressed the button when she was only about a half length behind that horse, about like she was just about to go by him, and she sort of did what she's done in most of her starts this year. She just couldn't see it out and backed up the last 1/8 of the mile. Maybe they're thinking that because she hasn't been finishing off her races that well, that the turn back in distance is going to work from her. I do see that logic. It's still a new hurdle for a horse that's going to be among the shorter prices or maybe the favorite. So I can't put her on top, but she's definitely one that I'm not going to let beat me in this race. And like you, I think the interesting price horse, and we'll see what kind of price she is the number 7 Kariba. 5.5 furlongs that she went in the Caress last time. That's probably as short as she wants to go. I think the 6.5 of this race is going to be much more preferable for her. And in that Caress, that was a race where, I mean, the fractions aren't color-coded blue in the PPs, but I imagine it was borderline because they were not really moving that fast up front. Jakarta, who I think is kind of inferior to these, she almost hung around that day because they just let her get loose on the front end. And the only two horses that really did any closing in that race were Kariba, who won, and the third place finisher, Sweet By and By. Sweet By and By came back and won impressively at Saratoga next time. I just think Kariba is a horse that's going to appreciate the way this race sets up and the slight stretch out in distance. So I would mostly use these three in equal strength. Let's move on to the 9th race, the third leg of this sequence. That's the Juvenile Turf Sprint for the 2-year-olds going that same 6.5 furlong distance. And Wesley Ward holds a pretty strong hand in this race. He's got the 2 favorites drawn towards the outside, the number 9 Outador, who was a winner on debut at Saratoga last time, and the number 10 Fauci, who finished second in the Skidmore Stakes, also at Saratoga, well behind his highly regarded stablemate Golden Pal, who probably would be about 2 to 5 in this race. But he's not running here. He's targeting probably a race at Keeneland as a prep for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint. So it's going to be out the door against Fauci, but there are some other interesting horses in here that I think shouldn't be dismissed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the race clearly goes through those two. Speed figures would seem to indicate that. They both ran 96 last time out. As you mentioned, Fauci ran into that potential monster, his stablemate Golden Pal, who would clearly be the heavy favorite in here. So neither one of those would surprise me, and I think they're the two I'm going to lean on most heavily. I was trying to make a case for some others. One was Country Final, but the more I looked at him in the pace scenario, which I think is going to be pretty hot, I think the distance is going to be just too much for him. Since there is a lot of pace, I'm actually going to look to a long shot in here and use the best Timeform US late pace horse in Perfect Mistake. He's a horse who he has a clear edge in that rating, and also he's a horse who has closed well on the track, but he looks like he has some turf breeding to me. I'm curious to hear which other ones you like. I'll leave it to you. I don't want to steal all your thunder here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against either of the Wesley Ward horses. Fauci ran fine, I thought, in his Turf Victory 2 back. He's going to take some money, though, because of that second place finish to Golden Pal last time, and I just thought he was no match for his stablemate, and I don't really know what was behind him that day. Outador, I think, has more room for improvement. He won that debut despite racing on his wrong lead through the entire stretch. He never switched over to his right lead. Maybe he's going to take a step forward here second time out. It's not like he was even betting that race, so it seems like he was a bit of a surprise that day. I'd use both of them, but like you, I think there are a couple of interesting price horses. One is the horse you mentioned, County Final, who has raced on dirt in his last 2 starts and run well, but arguably one of his better races was his turf debut where he won at Churchill Downs, leading every step of the way. Again, he wasn't facing the strongest field, but for a horse that was debuting in early June, I thought that was a pretty solid effort. And it just seems like maybe he stepped forward since then, racing on a surface that might not be his preferred surface. So I would definitely use him. And the other interesting horse is the number 6 Bodenheimer, who won his debut at Canterbury Park, just destroying a field by more than 11 lengths. You don't often see margins like that in 5 furlong turf sprints. It just shows the disparity in quality between him and the rest of that field. We only gave that an 86 Timeform US speed figure. That's one that's, I mean, it's hard to critique the speed figure because nobody else has run back on the turf. But it's just hard to know how good that field was. They came back on the dirt next time out. And this horse actually ran pretty well, setting a faster pace and just holding on against the tougher field. He really is bred to be more of a turf horse on the dam side. The one reservation I'd have about him stepping up in class is that there just is plenty of speed in this field, as you mentioned, so he's going to have to deal with that. But this horse does have real quality, so I would use all 4 of these horses, County Final, Bodenheimer, and the 2 Wesley Wards.
Yeah, I will just mention before we move on about that speed figure, it was the only turf sprint on the day. So I don't believe any of the horses have run before. Maybe one horse had run, but it was on dirt. So there wasn't a whole lot to go on. I kind of had to look at the turf routes as well and see, use the usual relationship between sprints and routes on the turf at Canterbury. So it's no question that's not the most solid speed figure you're ever going to see.
Yeah, it's hard to know because there's just nothing to go on in that race. But if you watch the race, the horse was visually impressive, and he looks like a horse with quality. So we'll see if he can handle the step up in class and if he's going to be a decent price. Moving on to the 10th race on this card, the Kentucky Turf Cup Grade 3 event with a $1 million purse going a mile and a half. And the big favorite in here is going to be Zulu Alpha, who just was on a tear during the early part of this season, winning the Pegasus World Cup Turf, winning the Mac Diarmida. Was upset in that Pan American, was off for a little while, but came back in July in the Elkhorn and got back to his winning ways with an impressive victory from off the pace. If he runs his race, he's going to be pretty tough to beat in here.
Yeah, he won this race last year. It was kind of his coming out party, set him off to better and bigger and better things earlier this year. And, no real knocks on him. He's clearly the horse to beat, and I couldn't blame anybody that singled him. I very well may do the same. Just we'll have to see how scratches are and how it looks. I think the obvious horse he has to beat is Arklow. It seems like we talk about him at least once a month on this show. He keeps showing up in these races, but he always gets bet. He's usually disappoints a little bit, but to his credit, he has been second last year in this race, and he won it the year before, so he obviously likes the course. And, I'm not sure I'd want to get beat if he won this race and get knocked out of a pick 5 for him. So for most people, I would think that's probably as deep as you need to go. I mean, maybe there's a couple others I consider here, just on the distance thing. Red Knight and He's No Lemon. They both look like on their best day, maybe they could get there, but I still have a hard time seeing either one of them working out a trip or they could beat Zulu Alpha.
Yeah, Arklow is kind of a difficult call because, you never want to be too dismissive of any Brad Cox horse as well as his horses run, but it does seem like maybe Arklow's lost a step recently. I will say, it was weird that they ran him back in 6 days after the Elkhorn, coming back to that United Nations. That's not a typical Brad Cox move. It's not the way he handles his good horses. That was just really bizarre that Arklow even ran in that race. And he was pretty dull in the United Nations. He just didn't seem like himself. But then again, he was also dull in the Elkhorn. He was right behind Zulu Alpha coming around the far turn, and he just couldn't kick for home with that horse. So I don't know. It seems like Arklow's maybe just not the same horse that he was last year. So I'm a little bit leery of taking him as the alternative, especially since it seems like he could be the second choice in this race. The one other horse that I do want to use, and maybe I'm just being stubborn about this opinion because it hasn't been right yet, but I do want to give one more chance to Standard Deviation, who I've liked in his first couple starts in this country, or rather his first couple starts since coming back from Qatar early in the year. And he hasn't run that well, but I think he's had legitimate excuses in that Tiller 2 back. I just think that it wasn't the right ride for this horse. They tried to keep him covered up in behind horses coming around the far turn and make a late run. And he got shuffled back a little bit and was just coming on too late. But he was running on at the end of that race and only lost to Sadler's Joy by less than a length. So he didn't run as badly as it seems in that spot. And the United Nations last time, it's hard to see when you watch the replay because for whatever reason, they zoomed in on the leader at the 8th pole and didn't allow you to see the other horses. But if you watch the head-on of the United Nations, this horse just got completely stymied in traffic at the quarter pole and basically lost all chance in that incident. And I don't know if he was going anywhere at that point in time, but that race didn't sit up for him anyway because it was dominated by horses towards the front and especially those that rode the rail. So I think Standard Deviation is better than he seems. And kind of like with Secret Message that we were talking about in that earlier race for the fillies and mares, he just seems like one of these horses that is going to benefit from the Kentucky Downs configuration because he needs a long stretch run to get going. He's got a lot of stamina. He can just kind of grind away at his foes. And I think he's going to run a better race here. If he's good enough to beat Zulu Alpha remains to be seen. That's going to be a tall order for him, but he's going to be a price in this race. So I'll use him as the value play along with Zulu Alpha.
That's good info on the trip with him. I just kind of read the Equibase comment, and it doesn't really say anything like that. So it just shows it can pay to watch these races, and sometimes you have to dig a little deeper and go to that head-on view.
Let's close things out at Kentucky Downs with the Run Happy Turf Sprint Grade 3 event, $700,000 purse, going just 6 furlongs on that Kentucky Downs course. And this is arguably the most interesting and difficult handicapping race on this card because it's drawn many of the top turf sprinters in the country. Some horses who go shorter distances more often than this and have to stretch out to the 6 furlongs here, and some horses who ran in this race last year. It's a really deep field. It's hard to even know where to start. I mean, I guess Bound for Nowhere towards the outside is going to take some money, as he always does for Wesley Ward. He was beaten as the favorite last time, or as one of the favorites last time in that Shakertown, but I don't think the 6 furlongs is a big problem for him. It's just a matter of whether he can work out a trip with a potential fast pace from the outside post.
Yeah, I found this the most interesting race on the card, and it's full of interesting races. But this is one where we need to work on my pick 5 ticket because I want to be pretty wide in here because I think trips could play a big part. Several different horses could win. Bound for Nowhere is certainly one that I'm going to use, but I mean, I don't think he's a cinch by any means. I don't think he'll be that 5-1 morning line, but there's some others in here we've seen. Stubbins has run well over the course. He's run okay his first couple times. We saw Kanthaka with that big win or big race at Belmont where he just got nipped by Alexandra late after looking like a winner. Probably 100 yards from the wire. Imprimis, who had won the Troy but was disqualified, but certainly ran a big race that day, got a 123 TimeformUS speed figure. If I had to make a top pick in here, though, I would go with Totally Boss. He's a horse who just narrowly missed in the Shakertown, was absolutely flying late, just couldn't quite catch Leinster at the end. Has a win over the course last year as a 3-year-old, and in a wide open race, you have to pick somebody on top. And I would actually, if he was a 9-2 odds, he's a horse I would play in verticals and make a win bet on as well. But it's one you just have to wait and see what kind of prices you're getting, but definitely a spread race for me.
It's funny, of all the favorites or the horses that are among the shorter prices on the morning line, the one that I did not want was Totally Boss because I thought he got a pretty good trip in the Shakertown last time. He did have to swing wide to make that run, but that race was kind of coming apart a little bit at the end, and Bound for Nowhere I thought was pretty brave to hold on for third in that spot. Of the horses coming out of that race, I preferred Bound for Nowhere. And the other thing about Totally Boss is I know he's got that win at Kentucky Downs last year. I don't quite buy into that performance because if we remember, that September 7th card at Kentucky Downs was one where speed was just deadly. It was winning every race. And also this Kentucky Downs turf sprint last year, for some reason in 2019, there was no speed in the race, and it was just dominated on the front end through slow fractions. The horse that was second, Smart Remark, has set the pace, was, I think, 65-1 that day, and he and Totally Boss just dominated that race, and nobody could come from behind. It's a totally different situation this year, and Totally Boss, he's versatile enough to come from much farther back in the pack, but I just think he's going to take some money off that form and the race last time, and I thought there were other horses in here that I preferred, that I felt a little more comfortable relying on. If I had to make a top pick, it probably would be Stubbins. I really liked his Jaipur last time. I thought Louis Saez got too aggressive that day. I mean, I don't like to criticize riders for getting too aggressive because they should all be taking cues from Louis Saez. But that Jaipur, there were two speeds in there, Pure Sensation and Hidden Scroll, who just hooked it up on the front end and really went as fast as you'll see in a race like that. And Stubbins was close to a pace that really just completely fell apart. I think the winner, Alexandra, came from last. Kanthaka, who was second, also came from far back. And Stubbins was pretty brave to hold on for fourth. Only beaten by just over 2 lengths. So I think he makes a lot of sense. And as you said, he also has a good race over this course. So I would use Stubbins. I'm using Bound for Nowhere. I also think Imprimis is a horse that should be taken seriously here. He was beaten by Totally Boss in this race last year, but when you go back and watch that race, as I was saying, the pace didn't quite work out for Imprimis. And also, he was kind of buried inside behind horses for much of the stretch drive. So I would rather take him out of that race. And I liked his return in the Troy last time. I know he got disqualified there, but he was a dominant winner that day, even though the win was taken away from him. So off that race, I think he's very competitive. And arguably, when he's at his best, he's among the best turf sprinters in the country. So based on that last performance, if he's in top form, I think he's going to be tough here. And then one other horse that is just kind of ridiculous that I probably shouldn't even go to the length of mentioning, but is more a horse that I just will use underneath somewhere, is the number 8 Bon Raison. He's going to be like 50-1 in this race. He's just a weird claim. Calumet Farm, who bred this horse and began racing him, claimed this horse back for $80,000 at Saratoga last time. Calumet's not a claiming outfit. Jack Sisterson is not a claiming trainer. And they took this horse, I'm guessing with the intention to run in this race. I mean, there are other things at play here. They stand his sire, Raison d'Etat. They bred this horse. There's probably some incentive to either make him a stallion because he's a full horse or just boost the stock of his sire. But Bon Raison, he was cut out to be a turf horse at the beginning of his career. And I know his turf form looks terrible, but his overall form was just not good at the time when he ran on turf in the past. He's a much better horse since then. He's a much better horse than even his recent form would suggest. And he has not been in the barn of a trainer that's been as successful in top races like Jack Sisterson, really for his entire career, at least since he started out. So he's just a horse that, if the pace comes apart, could be running on at the end. Again, he's not a horse that I'm saying I'm picking to win the race, but he's one that I would use somewhere underneath because he's going to be a huge price.
Well, if you're waiting for me to knock anybody picking a horse that's going to be 50-1, you'll be waiting a while. So, and I know he's not your top pick, but you made some good points there.
So, I mean, that's a really tough pick 5 sequence. And I personally was not like looking to single horses in any of those races. I would be going at least 2 deep in all of them. So that often results in a more expensive ticket. I would really just try to pare it down and not make any of them like totally spread races. Even in the last race, I would try to narrow it down to maybe those 3 horses that I said I was going to focus on. But it's a tough sequence to narrow down.
Yeah, I'd agree. Maybe Zulu Alpha would be a single for me, but I would probably go 2 or 3 deep, and that's how I'm going to go most of the races. I can't super spread in any of them really because of that without the single. I mean, I'm not looking to spend $500 on a pick 5 or anything, but it's a fascinating card. It's good value at the 14%, so I'm looking forward to it. I'll be honest, I don't bet a whole lot of Kentucky Downs, but I will be playing on Saturday.
Yeah, it looks like a sequence that's going to pay well if you hit it because it just doesn't seem like one that's going to be dominated by short prices. And even if some of the short prices do win, it seems like it still has to pay a decent amount. Let's move up to Canada and talk about their big race on Saturday. Really the jewel of their season, the Queen's Plate for the Canadian breds, going 1.25 miles, the 3-year-olds. And it's an interesting matchup because we've got some of the best Canadian-bred 3-year-old colts in Canada facing off against the best fillies. And the 2 that are likely to vie for favoritism are the number 10 Curlin's Voyage, a filly, and the number 12 Clayton, a colt. Both of them have some questions to answer. I think they're both win candidates in this race, but it's a pretty competitive field.
Yeah, I would agree. When you look at the speed figures, they don't have any giant edge over the field. This is what's fascinating for me is almost always the Queen's Plate comes in where the prior prep races come in the plate trial and the Woodbine Oaks, and they're usually run on the same day. So you have a direct comparison for times and things like that. So it's always fascinating and a fun race to make figures for. The last races of the 2 couldn't have been much different pace-wise. Curlin's Voyage came out of a race with a really hot pace. That Woodbine Oaks, all the fractions are coded in red, whereas Clayton comes out of a race with I'll say moderate because it didn't quite meet the threshold to show up as blue, but at best moderate would be what I would say. That's because of that, I'm going to favor the filly a little bit, Curlin's Voyage. The pace projector think it's going to be quick early. I can't disagree looking at the PPs, given the big field, the big purse, plenty of early speed in here. And it does trouble me a little that Clayton's never been in a race that has even a single red fraction. That's something I like to look at with younger horses. So between those two, I'd probably favor the filly, but neither one would surprise me. But like you said, there are some others in here that have a chance. Of those two races, I definitely preferred the Oaks, so I'm kind of dismissing the horses who couldn't beat Clayton last time out. I'm looking at the filly Mervalo, I think is how you say it. She's been running well, was able to make up some ground last time in that race with Curlin's Voyage, who actually made a big early move into that hot pace. So that's another reason I favor her a little bit over Clayton. But yeah, she was further back than she normally is and made up some ground. And I also think there was a strong allowance race that was run, and both Mighty Heart and Tecumseh come in out of that. Mighty Heart has run really well since moving to Tepeta. He looks like a completely different horse. I think he's got a shot in here. And the same for Tecumseh's War. I think that race was a strong one and probably just as good as the plate trial.
Yeah, we see the two favorites, I think, in a pretty similar fashion. I probably slightly prefer Curlin's Voyage to Clayton, but if they're both as short as they are in the morning line, two distinct favorites, I don't know if I'd want to lean too heavily on them because I think it's a more competitive race than that. My take on the Woodbine Oaks was pretty similar to yours. Curlin's Voyage definitely ran well that day because the pace was fast, but she made an early move into the race, really starting around the 3/8 pole and got to the front in upper stretch and had the race won at that point. I do think, though, that the number 2 horse, Merveilleux, I guess is how you say her name, she did have some trouble in that race. She was trying to follow Curlin's Voyage into the race when she was making that early move, and she couldn't quite get to the spot at the right time, and she had to steady and basically alter course around a tiring foe and lost the momentum coming to the top of the stretch, and she was really finishing off best of all at the end of that race. The 1.25 I don't think it's going to be a big problem for her. She actually ran just as well as Curlin's Voyage in a race when both of them were 2-year-olds going the 2 turns, so if she is 10-1 to Curlin's Voyage's 5-2, I'd rather take her at a bigger price. And out of the race that Clayton exits, the plate trial, again, I mean, as you said, Clayton was stalking a relatively slow pace, had trouble putting his foes away. What I also don't like about Clayton are two things. He doesn't always break that well. He tends to be a little unfocused at the start, and that's not something you want to have happen in a 14-horse field. I mean, actually, the same thing is true of Curlin's Voyage to a greater extent, but she's a closer, so it doesn't matter as much for her. The other thing about Clayton is that he does not settle in his races. Even in his longer races, the last couple of times, he tugs at his rider, he doesn't want to rate and follow instructions in behind horses, and he's just still won those races on sheer talent and speed, and I'm just not sure he can overcome those little bits of immaturity going the 10 furlongs. So out of that plate trial, I actually prefer Halo Again, who was second to him. I know Halo Again didn't really have an excuse to lose that race, but he just strikes me as a horse that is going to handle the 10 furlongs. I know he's by Speightstown, who was a sprinter, but Speightstown can get horses that go longer distances, and on the dam side, there's a ton of stamina breeding. Halo Again's actually a half-brother to Inflexibility, a Chad Brown horse who could go longer distances. She was actually a winner of the Wonder Where, going this distance up in Canada as a 3-year-old. So I think Halo Again is just going to be able to outstay his foes in this race, and while there is a fast pace predicted, I don't see really any frontrunners in this race. They're all horses that want to be just off the pace, so I don't think it's going to be quite that hot up front. It'll be contested, but I don't see this as a race that's just going to fall apart. So I do want a horse that has some positional speed, and I think Halo Again falls into that category.
Yeah, no real problem with him. It is a fascinating race. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to play it, but I will definitely be sending in some trifectas and superfectas, hoping to get some of those bigger prices in there, particularly the 2, as you mentioned.
And one other horse that I do want to mention before we wrap up, in addition to those short prices, you talked about some bigger prices on the outside, including Mighty Heart. Watching Mighty Heart's last couple of races, a horse that actually stuck out to me is the number 8, Ollie My Boy. In that race that Mighty Heart won by 4 lengths, Ollie, my boy, ran deceptively well in there because he didn't have a great start, was way back, out of position coming around the far turn, and was really running on at the end of that race. And he came back next time out with an impressive maiden victory, going 1 mile and an eighth. He's way too slow to win this race based on his prior efforts, but he seems like a horse that's kind of figuring things out now, appears to be one that's going to really relish this distance. At a huge price, he's the kind of horse that I would throw into trifectas.
Good stuff. That's the kind of horse I'm looking for.
All right, well, that's all the ideas we have in the Queen's Plate, and I think we covered those races pretty well at Kentucky Downs, so hopefully we gave out some pretty good opinions this week, and we'll be watching these races intently. After this, we'll recap these races next week on the Pacecast and then look to get back to Belmont and Santa Anita when those start up, kind of in a lull with the racing in California and New York this week, but we'll get back to the typical schedule next week. So thanks for listening this week. As always, remember you can listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back with the TimeformUS Pacecast early next week.